Well, hello, grievers. Mandy here. Restorative Grief is all about creating easy access to healing, no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, our Patreon features monthly workbooks to accompany each episode, as well as a Discord channel for more private chats and occasional bonus content as well. Supporting this work with your finances means investing in your own wellness and the healing of others, and that in itself is an incredibly generous and restorative practice. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes, but reach out with questions, okay? Now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 163, titled Let Your Voice Be Heard with Jenai Auman. Sometimes the source of our grief is crystal clear because of a death. And other times, it's elusive until you find a way to name the loss or losses and give yourself permission and space to heal. My guest today is Jenai Auman, author of Othered, Finding Belonging with the God Who Pursues the Hurt, Harmed, and Marginalized. When Jenai finally verbalized the harm she experienced from church leadership, she was unceremoniously fired from her role on staff. But in losing her job and her spiritual community, she found her voice and, most importantly, a better way to belong. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today my guest is artist and author Jenai Auman. Her debut book, Othered, Finding Belonging with God Who Pursues the Hurt, Harmed, and Marginalized, is out, and she is just one of the most tender, open humans. You're going to love her, and I'm so excited that she's here today. Hi, Jenai.
Hi, Mandy. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. I know that this is an incredibly intimate book and meaningful and powerful story that you unfortunately got to write, and we're given the space to share this story from your point of view. But let's just invite people to understand what the title "Othered" is even referring to, because it is a difficult concept to understand, I would think.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those concepts that a lot of people bring preconceived notions to.
Yes. Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people, especially within today's like particular sociological climate, it sounds very like racial driven. And I would say, yes, it is. But also, I tend to tell people that othered is really any sort of exclusion. It's any sort of exclusion, but with a value statement that says you are less than. You are somehow not as important. You're not as valuable as the people that we seek out. And in the title, the subtitle, the word hurt, harmed, and marginalized is in there. And it is any sort of marginalization that says you are not center to the story. As our community gathers, your story is not important. The life that you live is not important. And so, because it's not important, and because somebody in some position of power has said, you hold no value, they marginalize your story. And so often that happens because the stories of the marginalized kind of point directly to the faults in the system. And so I wrote Othered specifically because of my experience of being cast out and pushed to the margins within my own faith community. I was on a church staff that I served at for 3 years, at the end of 11 years of membership there. But I also kind of weave in the idea of like, I've felt this before living as other, as a Filipina American in Texas. And so it is a lot of personal narrative, but I weave in theological narrative and also trauma informed exposition, so that people can find belonging again, not only belonging to a community, but like what it means to belong to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to say too, the idea of othering is it can be benign in the sense that we create meaning by understanding our differences between self and others in
Mm,
a non-harmful way, right? We can acknowledge that there are differences and those are
yeah.
celebrated. And this is a very different application of the concept. It's that, like you said, it's that harmful distinction where we decide, oh, you're less than me, not just you
Mm,
have differences and we have things to celebrate about our diversity. No, I'm better than you because I belong, look right, sound right, say the right thing, whatever that is that's
yeah.
used to create that margin
Yeah.
that you can be pushed over. Okay, let's start with that 3-year period when you first joined the staff after being part of this church community for a long period of time. Was it then in the onboarding process that you knew this is going to be wonderful and then something changed? Or were you like first step in the door thinking, this is going to be terrible. I'm here to make a change because I've been here for years and witnessed these things? Because we have this idea that we can go into a setting and say, I know what the problem is. Let me fix it.
Mm.
And we also go in, or alternatively, we can go in thinking, let me just be eyes wide open and see what I see.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say yes. There was a within the network I was a part of, they kind of perpetuate this idea of inner circles. So there's an in crowd that knows kind of the more inner workings of the community. And then there are kind of the members who are connected at various levels of connection or disconnection. I remember one of the words that we used often in the church was fringe. Like that's a fringe person in the church, meaning they haven't totally bought into it's very culty
Wow.
language. Like we would that was actually we that person is a fringe member of the church. I mean, in it's often said in a kind of non-judgmental way, like there's not necessarily a value statement
Mm,
intended, but there's a value statement there in that like they have not totally bought into what we're putting out there.
yeah.
And so there's kind of an innate like divide. Like we can't fully trust this person, or we have to kind of graft them in. Now that I'm talking about it, it does feel very culty.
Yeah.
And I would say that the network I left was very kind of cultish in many of its regards. But yes, I was a part of the church for 8 years before I went on staff. And even at that point, I would say, in all honesty, that there were hard things that I saw going on in the church. But still, I stayed. And I thought, no church is perfect. I stayed. And there is something for anyone that is very familiar with Enneagram language. I'm an Enneagram 2. And so caring, loving, believing the best in people, trying to be a cheerleader, supporter of people. And there was something within me that knew innately that I was made to care for people. In my network, women are not allowed to be pastors. You're not allowed any sort of uh, authority or leadership position, or you're given something that looks like leadership, but it's really kind of a tokenized position. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
anyway, I went on staff in an administrative role, but also kind of served as one of the women on staff, one of the points of contact for women within the church. And so it was ministerial in many ways, even though in the United States we have like a clergy exemption I did not have that clergy exemption because women can't be clergy in that network. And so, but yes, the moment I went on staff, I came on very eager. And day one, and I write about this in the book, day one started with a optional, and I feel like that's very important for me to say. It was a very optional Bible study that we could opt into to attend before the workday started. And because I was 5 minutes late to this optional Bible study, and so was another female coworker, our executive director became so I have no words to describe like, and I'd never experienced him in this way until this moment. He became so irate and started raising his voice. And I mentioned in the book, I don't know what constitutes yelling, but it's to the point that other people in other rooms of the church building, pastors were not in this Bible study in particular, pastors in other rooms of the church, a pastor counseling in another room of the church could hear um, this man excoriating me and myself. And I remember thinking, I am so confused right now. Why I've never experienced being yelled at in the middle of or at the beginning of a Bible study. We're about to open our Bibles to Luke 1. You know what I mean? Like, why is this happening? And also, I'm the new person, I'm the new kid on the block. Like, I am new here. I'm kind of taking social cues. And that's what we all do. Anytime we're in a new environment, we're taking social cues from others in the room to figure out, like, what is the dynamic of this place?
Yeah.
And no one else is saying anything. Like, they're just taking it. And I thought, this is I was so confused, started speaking up and advocating for myself. And anyway, he eventually cooled. We eventually began our study of Luke 1, and the Bible study itself was just kind of the most bewildering experience. There was more yelling in future weeks. We had to, like, he eventually was encouraged to cancel the Bible study from the pastors because it was not conducive to our work environment, which is polite language that one could say. I would argue that it was spiritually abusive. Um, and yeah, I can't remember your full question, but that's kind of like whenever I came on staff, this is a really poor, overused idiom, but it's when I saw the ways in which the sausage was made.
Yeah.
It was gross. It was bewildering how dissonant, like, the message of grace and truth and goodness and kindness that we would preach on a Sunday morning, and then to see that mess behind the scenes, packaged. Yeah, it was like watching like poison being packaged and kind of hidden in this product we were pandering every Sunday morning. And for 3 years, I would say that's what I saw, and until I just could not take it anymore.
I'm so glad that you shared that incredibly vulnerable and painful moment. And I want to validate, yeah, that is spiritual abuse. But even
Yeah,
beyond that, that's just violent communication. Like, that's just
yeah.
straight out abusive. And we've normalized those kind of interactions in the workplace. And I can't speak for churches necessarily in the sense that I've never worked for one,
Mm,
but the grace that you offered by saying, I'm not sure what constitutes yelling, because something in your nervous system absolutely knows what yelling is. But I recognize and honor the fact that you are navigating a system that, like you said, normalized that and
mm,
allowed that to go on and was shaped very differently to be acceptable on a Sunday morning. And I think that that's where um, a lot of people in the church who have either volunteered or worked on staff who are coming from that environment into this place of, well, now what? Because that was all normal and that was what belonging felt like. How do I then reshape and understand belonging on the other side of leaving something that was said to be family for so long?
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. And I kind of, I think when you have those really harmful experiences normalized in the church, essentially abusive experiences normalized, abuse chips away at a person's, like, personhood.
Yeah.
Like, it diminishes your sense of self. And the fact that I felt like, I can't talk about the yelling in front of anyone else in the church, I have to hide. I mean, that starts to feel like, oh, like, so if anyone is listening and there's something happening within your church, or you've seen something and you feel like you need to hide that from the other people in the church, I would say, like, give yourself, like, space to pause and ask yourself why you feel like that needs to be hidden from people. Like, God's not so small or so ego driven that he needs you to protect him by hiding the truth of, like, the bad behaviors of other people in the church. So that should have been a cue for me. But abuse is a diminishing of self for the victim. I would argue it diminishes the personhood of the abuse. Like, it does just as much violence to the abusive person as well.
Yep.
But belonging, I wrote a whole chapter. I mean, I would argue that the whole book is on belonging, but I wrote a specific chapter on belonging, trying to bring in the communal aspect of belonging, but how for me, and I think for so many of us, there should be space for you. But instead of jumping from one community right into another, I had to kind of deconstruct or decompress. How did I become so enmeshed into a system that used me and abused me and did all of these things with God's name, saying these are holy and sanctioned? I needed to figure out who I was as a human being. And so my chapter on belonging is, you belong to others, but you also belong to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There is a great Maya Angelou quote that says, I belong nowhere and I belong everywhere. And I think it has something to do with I am free to belong anywhere and with anyone, so long as I always belong to myself, meaning I am embodied. I know how to take up space in my body. I know how to take up space without taking space from other people. I know how to combat against someone who tries to take up space within me. And we all encounter those people who are like, in a group setting, and they are kind of dominating the conversation or the atmosphere and I would say those people take up space and don't know how to give space to others. And we encounter so much of that within faith communities that I thought, I do want to belong to people, and I do now. I look at my phone and the people who regularly contact me, and 4 years ago or however long ago, whenever I left my former church, my phone, like the contacts, it was just grief. I would look at my contacts and see grief because these people are not speaking to me anymore. And now on the other side of that, I belong to so many people. And I found that belonging because I learned what it is to be unapologetically who I am, to use my voice, to see and find people who not only loved me, but also who encouraged my use of voice, who encouraged my feedback. They didn't encourage that I conform to some sort of mold or, toxic form of conformity. And so belonging, I think in many ways we conflate belonging with fitting in. And I had to kind of deconstruct away from that. I had to grieve the fact that I did do that. I had to grieve the fact that I tried to contort and become whoever they wanted me to be. And when I finally grieved it, I found space to just say, I'm not doing that again, because I've already lived the damage of it. And so belonging, I think it's a both and. I belong to myself, and because I am self-possessed, I'm self-aware. I know how to extend self-compassion, and because I know how to do that for myself, because I know how to love myself, I am now better able to love my neighbor as myself.
Everything you just said resonated personally, but so deeply in things that I've heard from people coming out of church environments that are not healthy for them. Specifically, the dichotomy between fitting in and belonging,
Mhm.
that we go through the trouble of reshaping ourselves and with beautiful intentions, right? The
Yeah.
idea of a faith practice that reshapes our way of thinking, our way of moving through the world is not a bad thing if it is unto the flourishing and the wholeness of others along the way. It is when we get that toxic mentality of centering ourselves and greedily sucking in at every power opportunity we can that it becomes so devastating. And I think for people who are fitting in really well where they are, it is an incredibly terrifying revelation to notice that you don't have a sense of belonging. And the way you described it as, wow, my phone has gone silent. That
Mhm.
is the big red flag that says you were welcome and you belonged because you fit into this framework of where I needed someone to fill in, right?
Yeah.
I needed someone to greet at the door on Sundays. And that was where you fit into my framework. But you're not here on Sundays. I'm going to call someone else. I think and I'm curious what your experience is. How did you care for yourself as you realized, wow, they've stopped calling? Is it me? Did I do something wrong? What is so wrong about me that I wasn't good enough to be contacted after I've left the church? I thought we were friends. Like that phrase, I thought we were friends, just is jumping at me right now.
Yeah. I would say, hmm, grief played a huge role, like, just lamenting.
Mm.
And I have a whole chapter on lament, on, like, giving myself space to lament and how Christian culture in the United States tends to marginalize and sideline stories of lament. We want to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, but we forget that there was a whole day, Holy Saturday, where, like, everyone just grieved, and how we just want to jump from Good Friday to Resurrection Sunday and not acknowledge the silence of Holy Saturday. And I realized I needed to experience that. I needed to experience the silence, and it was hell. I would say that was hell. If there is a hell, that was hell. And I needed to grieve. And I needed to release the I mean, I'd spent 11 years there building up a support system. And whenever you have like those notifications on your phone from like Facebook or I can't think of that app, like, Time Hop or whatever, on this day 8 years
Mhm.
ago, on this day 10 years ago. And it's like a picture of my kid the day that they were born or the week that they were born. And it's like people holding them and saying hello. And it's people all from the church. Like if I go to their baby books, when people still kept baby books, and look at the list of the people who saw my kids the day that they were born, it's all people from that church. And in many ways, I think, wow, they were really good at celebrating the newness of life.
Mhm.
And they were also really bad at speaking up against injustice. And like they were really good about, extending grace to me when I had my kids and feeding me. And they were really bad at extending grace to me whenever I point at the poison in the system from which they drew a benefit.
Mhm.
And I realized a part of the grief was not only the release of those friendships, but the grief of trusting that I was building friendships that would last for a long time. Like I really truly thought that I was like, my funeral is going to be held in this sanctuary. These people will be in attendance. And so grieving gave me space to get to the other side. I had to grieve. I had to go through it. You can't go around it. You've got to go through it. And there were some days where I don't know why our eyes get puffy when we cry. There's probably some like, physiological explanation, but I feel like I lived with puffy eye syndrome for months. And that was just my reality. And now I think I am so glad I am not trying to perform or pander to that same group of people for any longer than I had already done so. Because I think had I not experienced what I experienced while working and seeing what I saw while working on staff at the church, I would still be there, kind of performing, chipping away at my sense of self. And so in many ways, I had to grieve to feel liberated and to feel like I've in some ways escaped a harmful system. And eventually in speaking up and speaking, because I grieved, I was not only angry, although I was angry, and I think anger is sometimes a safer expression of grief.
Mhm.
Maybe you can resonate with that. But sometimes I was angry, but in many ways, I was able to have compassion
Mhm.
because I thought, oh no, like there are probably some of them who were performing who don't know what it means to belong to themselves, to be in that system. And so I there was just a lot of grief in my story.
I think your point of we don't know how to lament is one of the main reasons I wrote my book around grieving within the structure of faith, because I can't recall a funeral in the last decade, a conversation about loss with someone connected to a church that didn't end with, "But Sunday's coming, right? We're almost there. It's gonna be there's hope, but Jesus," right? And it just minimizes the reality of the human response of loss and
Mm,
the need to lament and the need to metabolize that anger or sorrow, whatever it is, through our human frames, right? Through this understanding and this reality of who we are and these bodies that we contain. And it's my experience is it's so much fear, kind of like you said, that people are going to expose themselves and see that they are also performing or that they are also
mm,
not necessarily aware of how to belong to themselves. And that's a whole different conversation, how to find belonging with yourself. And I hope people read your book and think, oh, maybe I can get some hints here because you definitely have them in there. But I think too, the thing I wanted to ask you about with a statement about using your voice, you had said
mm.
earlier people were grateful that I started using my voice and saying, "Oh, I see that you belong to yourself." And I'm thinking of the person listening who does not have safety to use their voice, whether they
Yeah.
don't know what their voice sounds like, whether they're not sure how to push back, or they've pushed back and now they find themselves quite isolated, questioning if their voice was the right thing to do, to use, the right tool, the right if it was the right moment, like there can ever be a right moment to push back. Um, but I'm just curious about what you might say to the person who has used their voice or is wanting to use their voice, but is also dealing with the very real threat of social isolation, of being othered, of losing a support system they've built in the midst of still recovering from a pandemic where all of our resources were cut
Mm.
very short. Um, because that I know holds a lot of people back from speaking up about injustice or even about something that they see that is wrong that doesn't directly even affect them, knowing what it could cost them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, oh, that's a really hard. It was really my use of voice. And I was so afraid of speaking up for a while because it was my voice and the ways in which I used it on my church staff. That ended up with my getting booted from the church. And so I remember I was speaking up. I was saying these dynamics are not healthy. This person who was preaching is not healthy. And kind of cushioning it in the beginning. I like, that sandwich method where you like
Yeah.
give really good news and then you
Ugh.
say the really hard thing and then you back it up with like, I remember using that so often. And that here's the good news. And almost sometimes feeling like I have to contrive some sort of good news to cushion the hard news. And
Yeah.
doing that for I would say I did that for a solid year, just trying to sandwich bad news. And over time, I realized with a person who I perceived this person to be a narcissist. So narcissists don't take feedback well at all. They are low on empathy. They don't care about your feelings. They all they do is they hear you attacking them. Even if in your sandwich method of delivering bad news, like the last thing I would say is like, you don't have to do this alone. I'm willing to do this alongside you. I'm doing this with you. I'm not calling you out. I'm calling you in. I want to walk with you. You don't have to do this alone. But for someone who has narcissistic tendencies, and narcissism is a spectrum, not everyone is, grandiose. There are kind of varying levels of narcissism. I realize that they will never hear I'm in this with you. For whatever reason, their own trauma, their own story, they just believe that the world is out to get them. And so the only way that they can self-protect is thinking, sidelining or marginalizing other people to protect themselves or to feel better about themselves. And so they never hear the invitation. And so it was my voice and my willingness to keep what's that scripture to continue to go to your brother when you have
Mhm.
something against one another. I did that over and over and over again. And it became unsafe for me to do so. It was unsafe because this person started telling other people that I was harsh. I mean, I'm a woman speaking to a man, so I'm harsh, I'm abrasive. In Salem, I would have probably been called a witch.
Right.
Um, I would have been, in Texas, maybe I'm called unsubmissive, disobedient. just for being a woman who's giving feedback to a man within a faith environment. And it was my voice that ultimately, I just remember thinking, I'm harsh and abrasive, and I've tried to tell the truth as gently as I possibly could. And there was no way that I could say this and be heard within this particular system. And so I distrusted my voice for a long time. And, there's some self-gaslighting going on. And maybe I really am the problem. They've told me I'm the problem. And thankfully, I've got people in my life who were like, people disconnected from the environment who would say, no, you saw the thing correctly. And it took them telling me over and over and over again, you named it correctly. You have just left a very toxic system that has discipled this crazy making behavior into you, and to disciple you into believing that you're the problem. And it took a community of people to say, you named it rightly. You saw the thing. You trust yourself. The Holy Spirit is also in you, and you named the thing. But also for those who can't name the thing, I know that many people leave church environments and have to sign NDAs, or I've even read that like non-disclosure agreements are in like covenant membership, like it's so bananas. I don't want anyone to feel bad for not being able to speak up. I've likened abuse within a church environment. It's similar in many ways to domestic violence. When, like, why will an abused partner not leave their spouse? And there's any number of reasons. And I've taken courses on how to help someone put together a safety plan if they choose to leave a spouse who's abusive. And ultimately, in the safety plan, they have to make the decision. The abused person has to make the decision to leave. You can't force them to do it on their own. And so, in the same way, I don't shame or guilt people for not leaving a toxic or abusive spiritual environment, because there is something enmeshed. Enmeshed identity is so big in these spaces, and you have to do the work of detangling your identity from that place. And I would encourage doing, like, what does a safety plan look like for you? Who are your people outside of this context to whom you can go for advice, for wisdom, for support, even if it's a therapist or just some other wizened person outside of the context? But I never want to shame anyone who doesn't have the capacity or the space to speak up, because I don't know what other, sometimes the church actually is supporting people in other ways while also abusing other people in the church.
Absolutely.
So it's never clean cut. It's always nuanced. It's incredibly messy. But because there is some good in there, the good does not ever outweigh the bad. You can never justify abusive behavior just because there are good things happening. I don't believe that. But I know that in the mind of someone who is trying to figure out whether to stay or leave, if the church is helping pay bills, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
how do you, I would just say for that person, just be gentle with yourself. Don't shame yourself because you haven't spoken up. I will say, if at all possible, within your capacity, go to folks to get more advice, more input, broaden your system of support so that you're not solely dependent on that community, so that, you aren't afraid. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to speak up. The church should not be a people of whom we're afraid to speak up. And so, yeah, I would say speak up in the ways in which you can. And when you can't speak up publicly, start training yourself to hear your own voice so that you trust yourself. Maybe not to the exclusion of other voices, but you are better able to discern your own sense of self in your voice. Because if you can affirm your own voice, I feel like that is so powerful. If you only look for the power of your voice in the affirmation of others, that's downfall. That's a part of the downfall of the church. And so, yeah, I would just say be gentle, and be discerning.
It's addictive, though, to hear other people say, "Oh, wow, that was so wise. Oh, thank you. You're saying exactly what I need you to say because I've taught you to mimic my
Mm,
voice, and now
yeah,
you're learning what I'm teaching." I'm thinking about how wild it is that we're talking about a safety plan, an exit strategy from an unhealthy environment in a church. The intent of a church, I'm gonna broaden that definition, is to be a safe haven, a location of hope and life and rejoicing. And here we are recognizing that that is just not the case when someone gets a taste of power and accolades because they don't know the value of their own voice unless spoken over a multitude of people, right?
yeah,
Knowing the sound of your voice in a vacuum, so to speak, knowing the value and the authenticity and the h the beauty of things that we can explore in our own lives without having to say, "Oh, I read the scripture and now I have a whole inspired speech, so I'm gonna go give it out," and that's where my value comes from, is being able to
yeah,
interpret or inspire people to do something I want them to do. I don't know, I think a lot because this isn't all churches, and we can say that, and I say that very lightly.
mm,
We know very intently that there is difficulty in church conversations, especially around leadership, but this is different than the board member saying we should be doing more outreach to our unhoused community versus outreach to missionaries, right? This isn't a disagreement among where church funding should go. This is a disagreement about how individual human beings should be treated
yeah,
and valued regardless of what they contribute to the community in front of us, right?
yeah,
So we're not talking about a difficult pastor because he likes the idea of music after the sermon as well as before. We're talking about actively diminishing the humanity of the people around us, and that is all too common.
yeah, yeah,
How would you hold yourself now that you've left in public settings where people that you knew, people that were a part of it, people that were maybe even actively involved, not just observing, encounter you? Like, say you run into him at the grocery store. How
yeah,
does your well, one, right? That's dysregulating. We know everybody's nervous system is going to jump with the idea of a threat or a conversation with someone that we're not interested in talking with. But how do you hold yourself? What do you do to resolve that dysregulation to just really protect your voice in that setting?
yeah, yeah. Well, I would say I've done a lot of healing to the point where I've taken coffees with some of these guys that ostracized me. And in the beginning, it was with a lot of trepidation. I remember one of the first meetings I took, it was, I need to see who I am and how I need to see the me now and how I measure up to this person. And like before, I would just fawn. I would do whatever they said. I would take them at their word. I just need to see how I hold my own now.
Mm,
And in one of those first coffee meetings or whatever, I remember talking about, it was just a hello, how like start of the conversation. How is life? And I remember saying, life is really good. I like my life now. And this particular pastor friend, and whenever I say pastor friend, this guy was a year older than me. I'm 36, so he's 37, almost 38 now. Like it's
yes.
not somebody who's a generation older than me.
Yes.
And so he was in many ways like a true brother. And so I said, life is really good. And he goes, there can be goodness in your life. That doesn't mean life is good. And in my head, I was like, dude, get out of here with that. Like, don't try to use some Jedi mind tricks to try to name the goodness in my life when I just told you I enjoy my life. I enjoy the goodness of my life. And I seeing that and naming that in that moment, I could also name all the times that he had done that previously.
Yeah.
He loved being this wizened person who named these things in my life for me. And so, in that way, previously, I had given power away. I was like, oh, he can just name all these things. He can name, even to this day, I've encountered somebody who had been in that church and then left. how this particular pastor is just so adept at naming the sins in other people's lives. And I thought, oh, that sounds really culty. Like, why isn't he empowering you to name like your limitation, not just as sins? I tend to, I kind of, it's in the Bible. I get it. It's biblical, whatever.
And yet.
And yet I get really icky because I
Yeah,
know it's one of those words that just gets slapped on things when I
right.
think sometimes what we perceive as a sin might be a trauma response that needs
Mhm.
my compassion and not my labeling it as a judgment on them.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of hear, this person's really good at naming my sins. And I think, wow, you are not a discerning, like they have trained you to not be discerning of your leader, of the ways in which he names things. And so anyway, that was just one particular coffee meeting that I had where I was able to see like, oh, this is really good. Like I have differentiated myself. I've healthily differentiated myself from this person. But also, I'll share this. I'm in the Houston area. The network I was a part of is a church planting network, and it connects with other churches, particularly in the Houston area, not within a specific denomination. It's just interdenominational, and I used to do a lot of work with that organization. And they had recently flown in a writer and author, Andy Crouch, to come and speak to these pastors and these church planters. And I've appreciated Andy Crouch's work, so I thought I'm gonna dare to show up in this space that where I am perceived as a troublemaker to many of the men in these spaces. And I thought I'm gonna be a little ballsy and I'm gonna show up in this space. And I did. I showed up a little late and I went with a friend. So I was anchored with a friend, and I knew this friend would help keep me anchored and like regulated in myself. I knew I had a comrade there so that if we heard something weird, we could look at each other and like roll our eye. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, have a moment. I see this was Ricky. That was not me. That was the okay, good. Thank you.
so
Moving
it's
on.
like
Yeah.
co-regulation of our
Yep,
nervous systems. We were
exactly.
keeping each other grounded and rooted, even though we were both women and we were in this sea of men who were fighting to be heard as church planters. And
Ugh.
we sat down late, and I realized the table, and they did that weird thing where instead of like rows of chairs, there are tables because there's a lunch. And so there's just tables and everybody's sitting at tables,
Mhm.
and you can't really see who is where. We sat down at a table in the back, and I realized the table immediately in front of us has the pastors from my former church. And I did not do that intentionally. I like kind of slapped over at my friend, and I was like, look, and we look at where we sat. We sat right next to them. And in that moment I was dysregulated. I was like, okay, what does I usually ask myself the question, what does self-compassion look like in this moment when I feel like I'm gonna lose my mind?
Mm.
And so I think you're okay. Like you're okay. You are free to leave. You can walk out. You can go to the bathroom. You can sit on the concrete steps out in front, and people can perceive you as a weirdo. And you are so self-possessed that you are okay with being seen as the weirdo, kind of telling myself these things. But anyway, spend the rest of the time in this event with these people. They know I'm there. I thought maybe they won't come up. Several people came up to me and hugged me. It was very kind. Um, and we didn't have to have certain conversations there. And some of the pastors who were a part of the former network I was a part of, they were asking me about my life, and they were so good, so glad to see. So it was all very cordial. And then something really cool happened. Um, I don't have a huge online presence, but I've got somewhat of an online presence. That's where I started hooting and hollering about everything and church abuse and stuff like that. That's how you and I met.
Mhm.
And so one pastor came up to me. I didn't know who he was. And there was viscerally in my system, I thought, are you about to say something like terrible? Am I going to have to fight you? Like, I started going into fight or
Yeah.
flight energy. And he came up to me and he said, you're Jenai, right? I've never met this guy in my life. He goes, I follow you online, and I think the questions that you're saying and you're asking are really good. I'd really like to learn more and connect and just understand your story and just hear more about what you have to say for the church as a church planter. And I thought, oh, this is really cool.
There it is.
And Mandy, the coolest thing is when after he like introduced himself and he walked away, he sat down at the table where my pastors were sitting.
That's right, he did.
And I thought, oh man, like, and those pastors watched this guy introduce himself, talk to me, and like walk back over. And so it was just a very weird moment where I was like, man, you don't even know that the dudes that you're rubbing elbows with are the guys that perpetuated this stuff.
Mhm.
And I felt like kind of empowered in that, like, I could I have a voice that's looked to, and I know my limitations. I'm not a rock star. I'm not a popular. I don't want to be popular and I don't want to be a celebrity, but I want to be somebody who knows the integrity of my message. And it was really cool that a guy that was sitting at their table acknowledged that. And so it takes a lot of I go into spaces like that very mindfully. And if it's a surprise, if it would have been a surprise, um, I give myself permission to walk away. You do not deserve a polite response from me. I do not buy into polite Christian culture. I don't buy into that. And I don't think that I need to bend to the rules of that. So for anyone who happens into a surprising instance where they're at the grocery store or whatever, and they see the people that are a part of the organization that hurt them, you owe them nothing. You owe them, like, you owe yourself the space to take up this, whatever space you need to take up, and space to have time to process through like how you're feeling. You don't owe them a polite response. They certainly didn't. It wasn't polite. Most of what these churches are doing to folks are not polite. It's not polite, although they may use polite words to do it. Um, you I think the best, I don't really believe in vengeance or revenge. I think the best revenge, though, is flourishing anyway
Yeah,
and like, walking away saying, I give you none of my time or my energy.
yeah.
I'm going to go over here, buy my vegetables, get my cheese, get my meat, and I will head out and like tip my hat to you or whatever. But that is as much as some people deserve from me. And that's probably more than they deserve in many instances. So you owe them nothing.
I love that because once upon a time, there was a person who politely said in a Bible study to me, to everyone, they would never directly address me, of course. Maybe we should all just really think before we speak and pray that it's the Holy Spirit that has us opening our mouths just in case. And I never returned, but I remember thinking at the time, you just told me to shut the hell up and you don't even have the cojones to look me in the eye when you're going to tell me, okay, okay. It
Well, the
was
Holy Spirit in me is telling me that you are not passing the vibe check, and I like totally reject everything that you're saying. You know what I mean? Like that's what I say.
That was pretty close to my response. It was I'm not a wilting flower, right? So it was a very moment of like, no, no, get eye contact. I'm going to make it awkward. What did you just say? I'm not going
Mm,
to fight you, but I want you to have the audacity. If you want to
yeah,
lead, you have to have audacity of some kind. And I think that what is beautiful about even those moments, right, that are completely disrespectful and unloving and unkind, um, is that it shows me who my people are and who they aren't. We
mm,
were kind of joking off air about that. If we drop F bombs and someone is offended, that's okay because the person with them might say, oh, wait, that's a safe person.
yeah,
That's okay, actually. I can still be a beautiful human and swear occasionally. It doesn't mean that some pastor is going to come along and say, if you would swear less, people would find Jesus. Those are not mutually exclusive things. And I
yeah,
think that we're used to, especially in Western church, we're used to saying, well, whatever it takes, let me just make space and make myself as small as possible. And your story is a beautiful invitation to people to stop being quite so small, stop accepting that minimizing, but another
mm,
way, right? And allow themselves to grow and to take up space and to ask questions that are not just to make themselves feel better, but to say this isn't okay and other people are going to feel better and feel whole because
yeah,
I'm asking these difficult questions. So thank you for being someone willing to push back and to make space for others to do the same.
yeah. Thank you for saying that and for inviting me to speak and for being a friend online. This is probably making these connections, getting to share this book, getting to continue on in the work that I'm doing now. Um, this is a part of my breathing life into a world that tends to cut down and cause a lot of death. And thank you for being a part of that.
Absolutely. Same, obviously. So if you're listening, you can go buy Jenai's book, Othered: Finding Belonging with the God Who Pursues the Hurt, the Harmed, and the Marginalized, wherever you get your books. It's beautiful. It's not a heavy read. It is inviting. It is light. It is challenging, but hopefully challenging in the way that makes you say, oh, that's a thought I've had too. It's a valid thought worth pursuing. So follow Jenai online as well. She's a wonderful presence on the internet, and it's such a gift to have this space with you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode 163 of Restorative Grief. Jenai's story is an invitation into the work of belonging and learning to recognize your own voice when it matters the most. Finding self-compassion for your experience is crucial in your healing process, and speaking on your own behalf creates space for others to find their own freedom to flourish too. Please be sure to order Jenai's book and give her a follow online, especially if you are discovering a need for true belonging in your life as well. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you for being here. If you're interested in bonus content, including workbooks for the episodes that you've heard, you can join us at patreon.com/MandyKpart and learn more about what it takes to support this work for yourself and for others. Grief experts and educators and counselors are hard to find. And so this podcast and the workbooks are meant to be a stopgap for care deserts. If that's something you care about and you're interested in supporting us, visit our show notes or patreon.com/MandyKpart to learn more. Please be sure to subscribe and leave a review, and consider sharing it with a friend as well. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.